Notre Dame has seen plenty of freshmen make an early impact, but who had the best freshman season of any Irish player in the last 15 years? The answer coming up next.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up and welcome to Locked On Irish. It is Friday, May 19th, so happy Friday to you and thank you for making this your first listen of the day. As always, you can watch along on YouTube or listen on your favorite podcast platform. However you may be listening and wherever you may be tuning in from, I appreciate you joining me here, and all I ask is that you please subscribe to the show if you have not already. My name is Tyler Wojciak, and I am the host. I'm a Notre Dame alum and have been podcasting about the football team for the past 4 years. I'm also a producer for college football talent at the Fox Sports HQ in LA. And in today's episode, I'm going to give you my top 5 list of the most impactful freshmen to play at Notre Dame in the last 15 years. And let me be clear, this is not a question of who went on to have the best career at Notre Dame. No, this is about which players had the best freshman season at Notre Dame since the year 2008. And I'm referring to true freshmen, so redshirt freshmen do not count on this list. I was inspired to do this segment after I read a great article today from Tim O'Malley of Irish Illustrated about the difference between early enrollee freshmen and those who arrive in June. O'Malley makes the point that some players benefit from enrolling early, but when you look back historically, the best freshmen to play at Notre Dame typically enroll in June and not January, which is sort of contrary to popular belief. O'Malley mentions a bunch of former Irish players who had stellar freshman season. It got me thinking, wow, Notre Dame has had a lot more instant impact guys than I had thought. And I feel like there's been a misconception among the fan base, especially when Brian Kelly was around, that Notre Dame was averse to playing freshmen, particularly on offense. But I don't think that's the case. And O'Malley lists over 20 examples. It was a great article, so if you haven't read it yet, go check that out. And there's even some guys who I forgot who helped out right away, like Robert Hainsey and TJ Jones. So I started to go back through the stats, and I realized, yep, this is what I'm going to talk about on the show today. And I might even make this a recurring thing where I turn the Friday episodes into some sort of a Flashback Friday sort of deal where I go back and look at some historical stuff during the summer months when, let's be honest, there's just not as much going on in the college football world. I'm still workshopping this idea, but for today, let's take a look back and determine the top 5 freshman seasons of any Irish player since 2008, and we begin at number 5. This one was Kyle Hamilton. Not really that surprising, not really recency bias there either. When we look back at Kyle Hamilton's career, there was a ton of hype around him coming into Notre Dame, and he skyrocketed up the recruiting rankings later in his career. He was a high 4-star recruit, the number 60 player overall in the 24/7 Sports Composite in 2019. So even though he wasn't a 5-star, he was sort of talked about like a 5-star player when he was coming to Notre Dame. And I think Pete Sampson from The Athletic was sort of leading the charge at that time. And that hype only amplified after his first practice as a true freshman in fall camp. I believe he picked off 3 passes in day one. And it became pretty clear from that moment on that, okay, this guy's really good, and he's going to make an impact early on in his career. And then in his first his first game against Louisville, he did not start that game, and he really did not start much at all that season because he was behind Jalen Elliott and Alohi Gilman, 2 veteran safeties who were actually both captains at one point in time during their career at Notre Dame. But he played in that game against Louisville, and he had 2 passes defended in that game. I was there, and I remember just kind of eyeing him down because we had heard so much about him. And he was already making plays that, frankly, we had not really been accustomed to, with the exception of Julian Love, who is outstanding at pass breakups and things like that. And then you see that from a true freshman, you're like, okay, like that game against Louisville wasn't great, but that was the lone bright spot, or one of the few bright spots, I would say, from that game. And then his home debut. And what a memorable start to his home career, because his first defensive snap in Notre Dame Stadium was a 34-yard pick six against New Mexico. That was just, it was like out of a movie, kind of. And I know that it was kind of like an easy touchdown. Once he made the pick, he just streaked down the sideline and scored. But it was just so crazy to think about all the hype and all the talk about him coming into his career. And then for it to start like that was truly insane. I mean, we've seen some impressive freshman seasons and the starts of them that I'm going to go over here in a bit, but that one was truly memorable and one I'm not going to forget. So if we look at his freshman season by the numbers, he had the 2 passes defended in his debut, like I mentioned. He had the pick six, but he also had an interception in that win against Virginia, and then he followed that up with interceptions against Virginia Tech and Boston College that year. He actually led the team with 4 interceptions that season, and he was one of just 4 freshmen in the FBS to record 4 or more interceptions that season. He was second on the team in pass breakups, and he averaged 34.9 coverage snaps per reception per PFF. So basically, he only allowed 7 catches all season. That's probably a simpler way to put it, but it didn't matter. He was outstanding in coverage, and he was a good tackler as well. But the reason I put him at 5, and I'm not going to lie, I was sort of torn about this decision because I was going back and forth between Hamilton and Kavari Russell. And I think Kavari Russell was more important to his team in 2012 because Notre Dame didn't really have another corner without him. But I have to give the nod to Kyle here because he forced himself onto the field. He was so good, and he basically was getting some snaps instead of Jalen Elliott and Alohi Gilman, even though they kind of used him in some nickel sets and things like that. His stats back it up. He was so good right away, and he was just an impact player from day one. So that is why I have him at number 5. Okay, number 4, a little bit recent one, Benjamin Morrison. This one was a massive surprise. Like, Jaden Mickey was the most talked about freshman quarterback in the offseason leading up to last season because Mickey had such an outstanding spring practice. And if you look at the recruiting rankings, Mickey was actually the more highly rated recruit. He was the number 217 player nationally and the number 28 cornerback, according to the 247 Sports Composite. Morrison, meanwhile, was ranked 311th nationally and the number 35 corner in his class, which now, looking back, obviously feels crazy. But Mike Mickens, credit to him. He clearly saw something in Morrison, had to fight hard to keep him at Notre Dame and get him to commit. So impressive eye for talent there. Hopefully that continues down the road here for Notre Dame as long as Mike Mickens is on the coaching staff. So Morrison enrolled in June and had an impressive fall camp. I remember hearing a little bit about him, like, okay, this guy's really good. So Notre Dame could have 2 really talented freshman quarterbacks. But I'm still thinking about Jaden Mickey because he had the spring practice, and that conversation led the way through the summer. And then in that game against Ohio State, you see Morrison getting snaps out there early. And personally, I was like, uh-oh. Notre Dame's got 2 freshman corners out there going against Ohio State, going against C.J. Stroud, one of the best quarterbacks in all of college football, not to mention their receiving core, which is the best in college football with Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Egbuka, all those guys. They were so good. And at the time, Jackson Smith and Jigba you thought was going to be the guy, but then he ended up getting hurt early in that game, so he wasn't really a factor. But still, Notre Dame's got Morrison out there, and you're like, okay, I don't know how to feel about this. But then he finished that game with 2 solo tackles and a pass breakup and looked really good, looked comfortable out there, unlike Mickey, who got burnt on that one play. Now, granted, Mickey was sort of in an unfair situation, but still, Morrison looked more ready to play in that season opener, and that was the case for the rest of the season, really. He got his first start against Cal, and honestly, Morrison had a relatively quiet start to the year. Like, he was getting a lot of action, had a couple pass breakups, and then we fast forward to that Syracuse game. I mean, Syracuse tried to go at him. Like, they were targeting him, and they got him a couple times. I think he had a bad defensive pass interference in that game, too, which wasn't great. But he wasn't playing poorly. Like, he was a solid corner, and it was like, wow, you got this freshman who's playing, and that's encouraging, especially for the future, because he was playing over a guy in Clarence Lewis. And, I mean, Clarence Lewis isn't the best corner out there, but Clarence Lewis is another guy who played as a true freshman. So this was really impressive that Morrison was even seeing the field at that time. He forced his way onto the field. And then the Clemson game. And Morrison absolutely exploded onto the scene. He recorded his first career interception in that game to set up a Notre Dame score and then made the play of the year, arguably, when he returned a 96-yard touchdown to put Notre Dame up 28-0. He actually finished that game with 7 tackles, which I thought was also really impressive because Clemson was trying to run a lot of bubble screens and things like that, and Morrison was just in there every play, making the tackles, 4 solo tackles, just an unbelievable game for him, and he just really continued on that hot streak the rest of the year. We get to the Boston College game, picks off 2 passes in the first quarter, and you're thinking, oh my God, what is happening? He finished the game with 3, which ties a single-game record in school history. It was the first time a Notre Dame player had 3 picks in a game since Harrison Smith in the 2010 Sun Bowl. And then in that USC game, a little bit quieter, mostly because USC was just going at Mickey that whole game. But Morrison did have a pass breakup, and then he added another interception in the bowl game against South Carolina. So he finished the year with a team-leading 6 interceptions. He finished tied for 7th nationally with the 6 interceptions, and he broke up 4 more passes. It's the most interceptions for any Irish player since Manti Te'o at 7 in that magical 2012 season. And I put him at 4 here above Hamilton, above some other guys that certainly had a case to be in this top 5 because he was a consensus freshman All-American, and by the end of the year, he was playing like one of the best cornerbacks in the entire country. So I know that if you look back at the early parts, you're like, wait, he wasn't as dominant maybe as someone like Jaylon Smith, who, tease, I'll get to him later. I just think Morrison's entire freshman year was incredible. Again, He didn't play out of necessity. He played because he was just that good from day one, the moment he stepped on campus. And I am so excited to see what he can do for the Irish over the course of the next 2 seasons, because I don't think he's going to be around for 3. I think he's going to the NFL after his junior year. All right, we'll continue with 2nd and 3rd place coming up next. This episode of Locked On Irish is brought to you by Birddogs. When it comes to Birddogs, nobody does it better when it comes to fit, comfort, and versatility. They've got some of the most comfortable shorts and pants on the market right now. I recently got a couple new pairs of Birddog shorts, and I can tell you right now, I look better and feel great wearing them. Their stretchy fabric makes them comfier than any of my other shorts, and their pants are so stylish that you'll have the freedom to wear them on the golf course, in a meeting, on a date, or hang out with friends. I started wearing them to the gym, and they're already my favorite pair of shorts to work out in. So you can go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege, and when you enter promo code LockedOnCollege, they'll throw in a free custom Birddogs Yeti-style tumbler with every order. So seriously, don't walk, run to birddogs.com and stock up on the most comfortable shorts and pants you can find. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Today, I'm giving my list of the top 5 freshman seasons at Notre Dame in the last 15 years, and we resume at number 3 with Jaylon Smith. I already mentioned him on this podcast, and if you remember, he was one of the most hyped prospects to come to Notre Dame in really the past 2 decades. He's a local kid. He's from nearby Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Notre Dame had to fight like hell to keep him over Ohio State. Urban Meyer wanted him so badly, but Notre Dame was able to keep him home and stay in Indiana. Smith won the 2012 Butkus Award given out to the top high school linebacker in the country. He was the 3rd-ranked player on Rivals nationally, the 7th on ESPN, and he led Bishop Luers High School to 4 straight high school state championships as a running back and a linebacker. He was unbelievable. He was just a dominant high school player, and the fact that Notre Dame was able to keep him around was absolutely massive. And if you remember, Notre Dame was coming off a berth in the national championship that season, and then they had a great recruiting class to follow, so things were looking great, and Smith was the clear leader of that class. When he got to Notre Dame, he certainly lived up to the hype. He started all 13 games as a true freshman, and he was the first Notre Dame freshman to start at linebacker in the season opener since Corey Minor did that in 1995. He finished the year with 67 total tackles, which is 3rd most in school history by a true freshman, behind Bob Golick and Ross Browner, 4 more than Manti Te'o. So he's in pretty elite company there. And that season, he was 2nd on the team with 6.5 TFLs, and he had 1 TFL in 5 straight games during the course of that season. So he was just all over the field. He had 1 forced fumble, 1 fumble recovery, and an absolutely huge interception against USC, plus 3 pass breakups. Like, he could do it all. You think about a lot of freshman linebackers when they get into college, a lot of them, they can't really cover, or if they can cover, they're not big enough to stop the run. That was not the case at all with Smith. He was just a beast from the moment he arrived, and that pick against USC was just an all-time moment because it was a huge game. Notre Dame, they could not get anything going offensively once Tommy Rees left that game, and they needed to stop. They needed someone on defense to make a play. Jaylon Smith did exactly that, making an outstanding play in coverage. He also had a career best 11 tackles and a loss to Pitt that season. So by having 1 interception, 1 fumble recovery, and a forced fumble, he did that by his 8th career game. It took Manti Te'o, a Heisman Trophy runner-up and a unanimous All-American, 39 career games to do all of those things. So Smith came on, he did everything right away, and he lived up to the hype. And that 2013 season, looking back, it was incredibly disappointing for a lot of different reasons, obviously. It was just an insane offseason. Coming off that trip to the national championship, we don't have to rehash everything, but it was just a lot of bad news surrounding Notre Dame. But then you got a guy like Jaylon Smith coming into campus. He doesn't decommit, which I think some people were concerned about because I mentioned Ohio State earlier. Every school in the country was going after him. He was just that good of a product, but he was true to Notre Dame, and he was really excited. It was just so great to see a player of his caliber who wanted to go to Notre Dame. And he did everything he was asked from day one. He did not disappoint after an offseason filled with disappointments. And as a matter of fact, he exceeded the otherworldly expectations that were placed on him as a true freshman. So he gets a nod for going to wire as the starter. And you could make the case he was the best defender on the team at certain points, which also had Stephon Tuitt and Prince Shembo. So just an incredible freshman season by Jaylon Smith and an incredible career at Notre Dame overall. Okay, at number 2, I got Josh Adams here, which kind of seems crazy, but really, if you look at what he did, it's unbelievable, okay? And there really wasn't a ton of hype around Josh Adams as a recruit. He wasn't even a top 300 player nationally in his class, and he wasn't even the most talked about running back in Notre Dame's class that year. That was Dexter Williams because Dex was a much higher rated recruit. Dex was the number 94 player nationally and number 11 running back, while Adams wasn't even the top 300. He was number 305 player nationally and number 26 running back. Adams wasn't even listed on the two-deep depth chart at the start of the season. That was junior Tarian Folson as the starter, and then senior CJ Prosise was the backup. And then, obviously, Tarian Folson hurt a tore his ACL in that season opener, which really started a run of just an insane string of injuries that season in 2015, which I make the case that if all those guys didn't get hurt, that might have been Notre Dame's most talented team of the past years. They weren't as deep as some of the teams like in 2018, but man, were they loaded across the board that season. So Josh Adams started that as the third string running back, but then Autry Detson, the running back coach at the time, he said after the very first practice of fall camp that Adams was definitely going to contribute that season, regardless of Folson's health, and that's exactly what he did. His first ever carry at Notre Dame was a touchdown in that game against Texas. I remember I was in the student section, the crowd like, who's 33? I might have been, a little overserved at that time. It was a night game. It was a season opener. Vibes were high, and it was a beautiful day in South Bend. And I saw him score. I was like, wait, who is that? It's not Folson. It's not Prosise. It's like, oh, it's that freshman Josh Adams. And then he had another touchdown in that game. I was like, okay, maybe I need to start paying more attention to this dude. And boy, did he have just an incredible freshman season. He finished with 835 rushing yards, which is the most by an Irish freshman in school history. He beat the record set by Darius Walker, who had 786 rushing yards back in 2004. He led the Irish that season in yards per carry with 7.1, which is insane. He actually did not meet the minimum of carries per game in the NCAA. If he had, his 7.14 yards per carry would have been fourth in the entire country. He missed that mark by just 10 carries. So every time he touched the ball, he was very effective. 32 out of his 117 carries went for a first down or a touchdown. So he was certainly efficient. So 27% of the time, he's getting a first down or a touchdown. Just incredible stuff. He finished second on the team in rushing yards. He had 68.2 rush yards per game, and he was third on the team in carries, and he had 6 rushing touchdowns overall. He rushed for over 100 yards in 3 of the team's last 5 games. So really, by the end of the year, he was kind of like the guy. Prosise obviously had an incredible year that year, but by the end of it, Adams was just unbelievable. He's so big. He had such long strides. And not only did he set a Notre Dame record, he tied the NCAA freshman record with a 98-yard touchdown run against Wake Forest on November 14th. So he holds 3 of the top 5 and 4 of the top 9 single-game rushing performances in school history by a freshman. I could just keep going here with the numbers, but really, he just had an unbelievable season. And the reason I have him at number 2, and I understand he's got a real case to be number 1 because of the numbers that he put up that year, but to me, the one thing holding me back is just how good that offensive line was. At left tackle, Ronnie Stanley. At left guard, Quentin Nelson. At center, Nick Martin. At right guard, Steve Elmer. And at right tackle, Mike McGlinchey. That line was so good. I think even though his stats are incredible, you have to wonder what kind of numbers other guys might have put up too if they were running behind that unit. But obviously, Adams proved over the course of his career that he was an absolutely outstanding running back. But given the circumstances, I think that holds him back just a little bit, and that's why I have him at number 2, but it's time for the big reveal. So who's number 1? That's coming up next after a brief message from our sponsors. Okay, the best freshman season of any Irish player in the last 15 years belongs to, that would be Michael Floyd. Michael Floyd in 2008 was an absolute monster. Notre Dame was coming off arguably the worst season in school history, and even though the team was better, they were still not very good. And Charlie Weiss managed to sign a top 3 recruiting class after that just abysmal season in 2007, probably because he told all those high school recruits, hey, look at how bad these guys are. You're going to play right away, and that's exactly what Michael Floyd did as soon as he got on the team. Although, granted, Michael Floyd was a top recruit. He was top 30 player nationally. I saw him as high as 15, I believe, in Rivals, and he made an impression right away. His first career catch was a 22-yard touchdown late in the first half. Notre Dame was in a dogfight against San Diego State at the time. God, that era was so rough, man. I'm so glad that's in the past. But it made him the first freshman to ever record a touchdown in a season opener. His first career touchdown also made him the 4th Irish receiver in the last 20 years whose first career catch was a touchdown, along with Rocket Ishmael, Derek Brown, and Derek Mays. That's a pretty elite company. So, man, he started off with a bang there, and then he just followed that up the rest of the way. He only played in 11 of Notre Dame's 13 games that year because he suffered an injury to Navy, I believe it was, early in the game, too. It was like the 3rd play of the game, which is unfortunate. So he missed the Syracuse game, and he missed the USC game. But really, his stats don't tell you that at all. His 48 receptions and 7 touchdown catches broke Deval Kamara's record for most receptions and touchdowns by a true freshman. Kamara set them literally the year prior. Now, I would say that was mostly out of necessity. over the course of Kamara's career, we realized that he was really not that good of a player, but Notre Dame needed him to play in 2007 because they just didn't really have anyone else. But Floyd was better than that. He racked up 719 receiving yards, which also broke Tony Hunter's record for the most receiving yards by a freshman, which he set in 1979. He had 4 100-yard receiving games during that season. And really, this was just the beginning for Michael Floyd. Obviously, there was some trouble for him over the course of his career, but he was arguably one of the greatest Notre Dame receivers of all time. He was big. He was fast. Underrated as a blocker. He was a very physical wide receiver. He could go up, catch a jump ball. He could also beat you. I was surprised that his pro career did not turn out as well as I thought it was, or I thought it would rather. But man, did he have an incredible freshman season. And really, just you think about how bad that team was behind him or around him. He had Jimmy Clausen, which is great, and he had Golden Tate as the other receiver to throw to, and Kyle Rudolph as well. But that offensive line was so bad that Clausen was constantly under pressure, and defenses could drop more guys in coverage to bracket Floyd or whoever the case may be. So I think that season and the stats he put up, he set all these freshman records for receiving yards. Josh Adams did it on the ground. But I think given the circumstances, given what Floyd had around him, I think his season is more impressive than Adams, and that is why I have him at number 1. All right, let's look at some honorable mentions. Kavari Russell, corner, 2012. He started wire to wire, even though he was recruited as a running back, which was insane at the time. But he saved the season, really, for Notre Dame because Notre Dame didn't really have another corner. So he certainly had a case to be in this. Manti Te'o as well. He had a great freshman season, but he didn't really start until about halfway through. That's kind of why I gave Jaylon Smith a nod over him. And then I think Te'o was 4th in the most tackles by a freshman in school history. So he had a great season, obviously ended up having a great career, but that is why he didn't make it. Michael Mayer had an incredible freshman season. The fact that he basically started over Tommy Tremble, who would go on to be a 3rd-round pick in the NFL draft following that season, and he also played over Brock Wright, who was a 5th-year senior at the time, who is now the number 2 tight end for the Detroit Lions. Mayer was better than both of those guys as a true freshman. Had a great season, had a touchdown against Alabama in the college football playoff semifinal, and you could tell from that game, like, this dude belongs on the field going up against literally one of the best teams of my generation in that 2020 Alabama team. So Mayer belongs in the conversation as well. And then Julian Love was another player. Notre Dame basically had to play 5 freshman defensive backs in 2016 because they were so god-awful that year. Julian Love was probably the only one who deserved to be on the field, and we saw that. And we saw the reason why over the course of his career he was clearly the best one of those players and ended up having an outstanding career at Notre Dame and is now having a really solid NFL career as well. So that's my list. Let's go back through it one more time. At 5, I've got Kyle Hamilton. At 4, I've got Benjamin Morrison. At 3, I've got Jaylon Smith. At 2, I've got Josh Adams. And at 1, I've got Michael Floyd, of the best freshman seasons of any Irish players in the last 15 years. But that is going to do it for me today. That's a wrap for this episode, and that's another week of Locked On Irish in the books. So thanks again for making this your first listen today. And on the way out, remember to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, and give us a follow on Twitter at Locked On Irish, on Instagram at Locked On Irish Pod, and my personal Twitter account at Tyler Wojciak. That's at Tyler, Wojciak. Enjoy the weekend, everybody, and I will see you on Monday.